Those were amazing, really interesting and inspiring insights into your work and great questions too. So I kind of had the similar experience to the one you just described, except it was as the result of a major brain injury into cerebral haemorrhage that happened 4.5 years ago. So as a result of that, I lost language, so I was unable to read, write, speak, and think coherently. And as I still have trouble reading, but somehow my body still wants me to try and read. So I'm trying to read these words and having some trouble. Yes, this thing too, multifunctional. These are some of the words I was trying to express. So it was a really interesting kind of difference between what was going on internally linguistically and what I was trying to bring outside of my body. So internally it felt like there was certainly a dialogue. I don't know whether or not it was a narrative, but whether it made sense to me. It was thought, and the thoughts connected together. When I tried to bring them outside of my body and express them to other people, there was nothing there, or people didn't seem to understand what I was trying to say initially. And this is something which now, at the time it made sense, that now I don't know what I was trying to say, but it's kind of beautiful. I like it anyway. So there was meaning there. It was a web of connections that wasn't necessarily left to right linear order, but it was a really fascinating moment to kind of study a sort of liminal space in between perhaps consciousness and sort of semi-consciousness and unconsciousness, or something in between. It was a kind of pure, direct sensation. That's where I sort of found the meaning, not necessarily with words or images, but just a sort of a state of being that was very visceral. I also lost my right peripheral vision, which I still don't have. So in terms of what was being said earlier, that the two really went together, and I think that my continual inability to read is to do with that sort of disconnect, that really fundamental need for sight and language to coordinate, which is, I guess, relevant and interesting. That was my liminal space. Yes, neuroscience. So I sort of encountered this, obviously very quickly, kind of became a subject of neuroscience. And there's this really relevant kind of difference between neurology, which is what saved my life, and neuroscience, which is the study of the brain. And so to me, and I think that's where, in my mind, consciousness resides, in the study of, in the mind, the intangible, the realm that we can't necessarily measure or touch or fully understand. And so I think that perhaps neuroscience is in the wrong, or not in the wrong parameter, but in a parameter that's tangible, and consciousness is in one that is in the immaterial, kind of maybe even inexplicable realm. So it's I think a challenge for the neuroscience to bring those two together, and perhaps the studying of it is what is, I guess, what will take us there. As you know, I can't read, and I have difficulty. I like that slide. Sorry. I have difficulty remembering what I was going to say and then saying it in a coherent way. So I'm a kind of living example, I guess, of what consciousness is and how it can how it can operate even if there's something not quite connecting. And it's exciting to kind of, but quite frightening to share it with you kind of live and direct. This slide, I guess, represents what I was kind of trying to say earlier about perhaps neuroscience being the realm of, it's so mysterious and so unknown, and neurology, the one that we've gotten really, really good at, being in a really different kind of set of parameters of tangible matter. So just to kind of close, I guess. I think, I believe that obviously there's the consciousness we've talked about, the physical consciousness, the one where we can explore the self, and how to communicate, what happens when communication breaks down, how that affects the self. But I believe that the other consciousness, the one that we can't quite figure out, is where kind of the mystery unfolds, and I think it's not where we think it is. That's what I think.
Thank you so much, Lotje. So Lotje mentioned before that perhaps after she's spoken that I would ask a few questions just to open it up, and I'll open it up to the audience. So I wanted to ask you, we've worked together on a few projects, we've known each other for a while, but I'm interested in light of what you just said, whether or not for you in the consciousness that you're aware of now, because people are always telling you that it's shifted because this event happened to you, whether you have a sense of whether there's a difference between how you see things now and how you might understand consciousness now, and how people describe the way you might have been, or the way it was before this event.
I mean, before, I don't think I ever stopped to think about what consciousness was. I think I didn't really stop to think about it. It was a word that people said, but it's difficult for me to know whether or not I had any kind of insights previous to the surgery and to the kind of transformation of my perception.
Do you think it's because now so often there's an emphasis on you being self-conscious about what happened since that event?
Maybe, yeah, and I think because it was 4.5 years ago, which is relatively long, kind of a long period, it's sort of become part of my identity that this has happened, and so I've made this film, and because I can't really work in the way that I was able to before, it's what I do now. So yeah, in the sense that I am that person now. So identity-wise, it's definitely affected how I understand that and selfhood.
And I was really drawn when I first met you to those slides you showed with that non-semantic language, that beautiful kind of script, and you kind of referred to it as a way of you learning again how to understand or create language. Do you think it actually had a role to play in you kind of rebuilding and understanding what language is?
It was certainly very fundamental to expression, which I think is something central to what language to what language is. And it was also it was something that was internally, as I mentioned, it was an internal narrative or dialogue that made sense to me. And I think narrative can be something that's experienced individually, but I think more commonly it's seen as something that is shared communication. And so I've just been kind of wondering, preparing for this event, what's the difference between narrative and dialogue, and I believe it's whether it's just your thoughts randomly kind of congealing, not congealing, but like your thoughts kind of flowing, or you're trying, something that you constructed, a constructed series of ideas or words or thoughts connecting to express with other people.
I can keep asking you questions, but I'll open it up. Does anyone want to ask Lotje a question?
Hi. You said something very interesting. Well, it's all interesting, but the very first thing you said was really interesting. You said that you lost language, and so you found it hard to read, to understand, communicate, and to order your thoughts.
Mm.
And I thought that was really interesting. You touched on it just at the end, talking about the difference between dialogue and narrative. And you said you felt you had an inner dialogue, but not a narrative.
Mm.
Some people try really hard to achieve that state, perhaps, through drugs, through ritual, through religious practice, or a combination of the three.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you got an insight into how linguistic or non-linguistic this kind of essential thought process is? And is there anything you'd like to share about that?
Definitely. I mean, friends of mine that are into that kind of thing were like, "Oh, I'm so jealous," and I've been trying to do that for years, and but basically, if you don't choose it, it's and I had no experience in meditation or anything, into the science of introspection or anything like that. So it's terrifying, really, when you start to understand. So perhaps not the first week or two, but when you're beginning to make linear connections, it's really frightening, because you're like, who am I if I can't think or express myself in a coherent way? But after kind of perhaps 6 months in, I learnt to meditate, and that really transformed my recovery. So I still do that, and it helps a lot.
Did you feel that your thoughts had shapes, had meanings, had things that you could relate to without being able to express them in words, especially as it came so unexpectedly?
Yeah, I was able to express, I did lots of, when I wasn't able to speak yet, I did loads of quite amazing, quite frightening, kind of bizarre sort of drawings and expressions, but they weren't linear. Most of what was coming out was non-linear, like the words you saw, they don't even kind of begin and end in a kind of page form. They're all kind of all over the place, and that was just my hand, my thoughts connecting with my hand and coming out in that way.
Thank you.
I think there was a question on the front row.
Yeah, you've answered it partly. I just wondered about, could you draw? What was your drawing like? And could you hum a tune?
Directly afterwards, no, I wasn't. Like someone in the hospital, to try and draw something, and I was like, well, what shall I draw? I didn't say that, but I sort of like, and someone said like a banana, and I tried to draw a banana, but it didn't look like a banana. It looked like a different kind of fruit. And then and then they were encouraging me to write my name or try and write, and I couldn't even write, my own name in my own handwriting. And then quite quickly afterwards, I started to be able to write, but write like a child. And then at some point, something clicked, and I was suddenly able to write in my own handwriting. And so now it's the same. I'm able to write fluently. I can think and write. That connection is like pure. But when I look at it, I don't know what it says. So it's like...
Please, a round of applause for Lotje Sodderland.